Well, first of all, I want to say thank you to a certain small percentage of the audience who genuinely appreciate me like this. And can I swear on stage if I'm not Babbage? Can't you? Okay, then I'm leaving. It's impossible to talk about this topic. Actually, for those who consider me a person not educated in the Ukrainian language, someone convinced the organizers so much that they even sent me a title slide, renaming Libid to Lebed. Well, that was a reference. No, well, of course, I'm from Kharkiv. And that's why I wanted to make this presentation like this. It's like Illya in Kharkiv preparing a presentation without electricity. But, well, actually, no. It's a double reference. On one hand, to Krylov's fable, and on the other, actually, to Libid, Ki, Shchek, and Koriv, only we replaced Ki, Shchek, and Koriv with a crayfish and a pike. Here, by the way, you can see that issues of gender equality, as they say, were already present back then. Libid is the only one who stands. But that's not the point. Since my presentation is intended for beginners, let's start from the beginning. This is a hyperbole. The entire presentation is, in one way or another, a hyperbole. So please do not take it 100% seriously. I believe that you're all great developers and that you all know how to find a specific example that doesn't work in your particular case. That's right, Isai, you're correct. It's just like that. But nevertheless, so next. Today, Mr. Babbage, whom I mentioned, and I met at a cafe, and talked about how, we've reached the age where you make slides not for the audience, but for yourself, so you don't forget what you need to talk about. It's like a bell for the teacher. The same applies here. So a disclaimer. Today, it might seem to you that, for example, I'm criticizing React a lot. That's not true. No, I mean, of course, I am criticizing it, but not React as React, but as perhaps the most widespread technology at the moment, and I will be speaking in a broader sense about Frontend. It's just that the likelihood that most of you know what React is, or have at least heard of it, is, well, about 100%, I hope. All right, we've got that sorted out. Let's probably start with the red flags. With a group coming out, raise your hands if you like Tailwind, so you can be heard. All right, put them down. I won't ask the other part of the audience to raise their hands, but based on my experience, a significant percentage of those people might think that you just haven't had proper CSS. Why? As soon as one person hears this argument, another would say, why should I bother with this CSS when I can just whip it up and it works perfectly in production? Since I like to change my mind on the fly, I've been here, there, and everywhere. Right now, I like Tailwind. I really enjoy that I can, without even thinking, copy a piece of HTML from one project to another, and it looks the same. Oh my God, how long? I've been almost 20 years in Frontend, and this has never happened before. Finally! Of course, I remind you, again, I'm exaggerating, because then these CSS fans catch me and say that we already have the ability to isolate styles separately. We have web components, I know. But raise your hands if you actively use web components in your commercial project. Well, there are people over there. They might not be visible, but they are there. All right. This is not just a slide about the fact that, oh my, I was finally promoted to staff front-end engineer at GitLab after 5 years. For those who don't know, I used to be... No, that's not necessary. It's not about that. It's about the fact that staff sounds pompous. It sounds like a person who heroically solves very complex modern front-end problems, who pushes forward, if not the entire front-end industry, then at least within the scope of GitLab. Well, first of all, everyone who has used GitLab and probably GitLab knows that there is a big room for improvement, a significant space for enhancement. And secondly, I was thinking, yes, now I will take a screenshot of my work and but I can't log into GitLab with my work account from my personal laptop. I went to the documentation and there aren't even any screenshots there. Why? Because what I do, that is, what I deliver most of the time, but it actually looks like this. I'm not joking, not downplaying it. So it's a form with filters with a sidebar. Actually, there are now 3 tabs instead of 1. So it's 3 times more complex, yes. And it looks something like this. Question, why am I doing all this so slowly? Because 20 years ago, it would have been a mix of PHP, a dollar call. Well, everyone loves dollars dot Ajax, and that's it. Instead, now I have GraphQL Apollo, which I really want to hit because it doesn't always work as it should. I have Vue, I have separate pieces, certain components that are used in UX. We haven't fully migrated from jQuery, etc. And GitLab, let's be honest, it's late. Well, lagging behind the hype of modern technologies by about 5 or 6 years. We haven't even migrated to Vue 3 yet. But how was it 20 years ago? A business client comes to you and says, make me that. You say, impossible. That's it. No more discussion. How does it happen now? You come in and you feel that the modern browser platform has given you so many tools that were previously impossible. Starting from those you heard about today, WebGL, WebGPU, neural networks can be effectively executed in browsers. You can execute all of this. Sometimes all of this is done in a not so optimal way. For example, do you know what the funniest show is in any project related to geolocation or access to the camera and microphone? When a person in your web interface suddenly denies access, and how many steps, which also depend on the specific platform they are on, they need to take to allow your site access to the microphone or the camera or the geolocation again. For you to understand, the day before yesterday, it seems, there was a big discussion on the GDE call, Google Developer Experts. Google will try to promote a tag that will allow access control, integration into the page. There will be a new permission tag, but it's not a fact that they will implement it. It's not a fact that Firefox, Safari will agree with it. Then we all know that we'll wait 5 years for compatibility with everything else. Then will this make it better? Actually, no. Because now we will have 2 problems. For some people, it works one way, for others, another way. And how to distinguish the first from the second? We will have polyfills, we will have auto-detects to understand if there is support, etc. So, honestly, I rather feel like this, when you suddenly say it will be done, but the infinity stones are no longer in your hand. That is, my path to implementing the feature feels somewhat like this. But I promised that I would contribute to the ecosystem. In reality, it's somewhat like this. Because it's a big problem that we won't be discussing today. It has become a trend in the open source ecosystem, which was full of enthusiasm 5 years ago, full of enthusiasm 10 years ago, to take investor money. And investor money needs to be returned. Sorry. If you're given something in open source, congratulations, most likely, you are the product. And this is a problem because, today I will be mentioning Next.js. Today I will be mentioning Qwik. Today I will also be mentioning Astro. For those who, as they say, want to faint, right now, if you don't know what to learn, learn Astro. It's a cool thing. I like it. So I just want to show you. This is what the Next.js site looks like. This is what the Qwik site looks like. And this is what the Astro site looks like. Don't you see some strange similarities? And why? Because all these 3 sites are not bad, they are nice, but they are selling. Their task is to lure you into this trap. Because, for example, how does Dino, which also took investor money, make money? Because they are making their Deno cloud, where Deno works best. How does Next make money? They create their own version. Well, they don't make it, it's adapted for Vercel, where Next works best. Hello to everyone who tried to set up OpenNext. And how will Bun, which was hyped, make money? Well, I have a question, which also raised investor money. But I was talking about React again. We will, as they say, of course, I'm already an old man, but we will switch to emojis. React. I remember when React was emerging, I came to it in versions 0.10 or something like that, or even earlier. I could explain React in 2 hours. So you take it, you have components. Back then, there were still classes. Classes are something that's needed in interviews. Oh, sorry, I got it mixed up. In interviews, you need prototypes, and classes are when you're writing in TypeScript. So you take it. You have a class, it has a state, you change the state, this so-called function executes, that's it. And you know, this legendary thing, I didn't even include it in the slides, F equals code from state. Meaning that the UI equals code from state. Meaning that the UI is a function of your current state. That's it. Try to explain modern React 19 now. First of all, you need to explain to a person that hooks are what they look like a JavaScript function, but in reality, they are not pure JavaScript functions and work a bit differently. We also have, so you don't have to think about it, and the ESLint plugin in our ecosystem. So whether you want it or not, now ESLint pulls in the ESLint hooks plugin. So if you want to use the compiler, now there's the ESLint React compiler plugin, or whatever it's called, and off it goes. And you know, there was a joke a long time ago that to write hello world in .NET, it takes 10 minutes, 8 of which are spent launching Visual Studio. The big one, not the code. If, like to write hello world in Java, it takes 2 weeks. You took one library, another, wrote an XML config to glue them together. And it seems like you're writing hello world, but it looks like a system for a small business. This completely describes my current feeling when I take Next. That is, you need to write a small hello world. Let those tables be GitLabs, for example. We don't have React, but that doesn't change the concept. And you're like, yes, so you actually have 2 component trees. There are server components, there are client components, and by default, these are server components. Server components have no state. Client components communicate with server components through routing. And if it's Next.js, you need to remember that you have 3 code execution environments: client, server, and edge cloud functions. If you're setting up Next correctly. And you're like, well, in short, this is just objectively my feeling about how I currently perceive Next. And this doesn't mean that Next is bad. Why did we come to this? Raise your hands if you're interested in regularly Trava and fundamentally solving typical simple tasks. Then everything will be fine in your life. Because the specifics of programming in the context of how it was formed when we all, sorry for including myself in your generation, entered the profession, was that programming required and stimulated the thrill of solving complex problems. If we look at the people who are now actively contributing to open source and shaping all the technologies we use, we will see that these people enjoy it twice as much, or perhaps 10 times as much. That is, the idea of solving something simpler it's somewhere nearby. We all love, and rightly so, to talk about developer experience and so on. But then you know, we have a project, we have a solution that solves 80% of our problems. But those remaining 20%, they are not solved very conveniently. So we complicate the system tenfold for the sake of those 20%.
And this happens to everyone. It's not just in engineering, it's also in business requirements. But business, as I've started to touch upon a bit now, usually has a bit more courage to sometimes say, no, we won't do this. And an engineer, when something is impossible to do, they say, impossible. What an excellent task. I signed up for the migration from Vue 2 to Vue 3 in GitLab. So when I talk about all this, it's about myself as well. This is, a little retrospective, so as not to repeat my mistakes. Everyone knows that's how I felt about front-end probably 5 years ago, or whenever I had a talk at Framework Days like JavaScript Day 4001, somewhere I talked about something like that. Well, everyone knows what the full version of this picture looks like. That's it. But I don't know how we got to this point, although I actually do know, and I'll try to tell you and explain why it's important, how we reached the point where everything looks like this now. So please tell me, yes, I have that feeling. I don't have a tinfoil hat, but it's like, those bone conduction headphones, meaning, protection from, we'll be discussing conspiracy theories, that somewhere a secret council of back-end developers gathered and said, why is it that these front-end developers only click buttons and paint? Why is all the complex logic with us? Let's just, do CRUD operation and translate JSONs, and let all the complex logic be over there on the front end. And they're like, no, but you understand, we need it to be fast. This means that we need to pre-calculate certain logic on the front end, on the back end. So basically, we come up with BFF, Trinit backend for front end, and we come up with the SSR, server-side rendering. This is when the code is executed on the server, but it's written by front-end developers. Well, objectively, that's how it is. Well, about SSR. And so they don't suspect anything, we'll come up with basically this code that runs on the server and the client. We'll put it in one file. That's how it is in Next.js. User and React, by the way, now offers us the possibility. That is, you write code in one file that runs both on the client and on the server. And if you think, I'll emphasize again that this idea is just something from React, or I don't know, Dan Abramov's sect decided to go this way. It's not like that. If we take Qwik, as I will mention today, the same concept is promoted there, use server, and off we go. Meanwhile, people who don't really know much, we end up with people who have a complex front end. And now, they also have to deal with a rather complex back end, which is overall complicated. I won't say that front end or back end is easier than the other. They are all more or less, in my opinion, the same. So, and what do we do with this, as they say? Hey, what is the most difficult for us? The most difficult, of course, is the state. The state changes, and somehow very subtly we transitioned to talking about how it used to be. We have the state on the back end, the database, so to speak. On the front end, we visualize something, but we don't really preserve the state. But then we wanted to. Moreover, let's put it this way, we didn't really want to. I don't know any sensible front-end developer who comes and says, and here, we'll make an optimistic response and everything will become beautiful. Well, because anyone who has used GraphQL and written optimistic responses for any complex client-side request knows what a nightmare it is. It's such a contraption that pretends as if it came from the server. That is, you have to replicate half of the logic on the client side and so on. No, some engineer came up with it. And now, thanks to this concept, we can do it like this. I went to the business and said, cool. The business said, oh, awesome. Come on, now everyone needs to use it. Everyone is following each other. How complex is the state problem in JavaScript? It is so complex that the State of JS 2023 results have not yet been released. the state is still being processed. Half a year has passed. I find it very ironic, meaning the state of JS, the main problem we have is precisely that the state is still missing. But now, seriously, if you haven't watched this talk by Dan Abramov from about a week ago, give or take, React for two computers, I highly recommend watching it because Dan explains various things very well. And most importantly, he has a magical gift of persuasion. So if you want to live peacefully and happily, just watch this talk. And afterward, you will genuinely believe that it has always been this way. That React has always existed, running on two computers, on both the client and the server, and that you simply never realized it before. And now, when you consciously know this, you will be able to write more easily, efficiently, and so on. In fact, as psychological studies show, the more a person knows, the more unhappy they are. There's an inverse correlation between IQ level and perceived happiness. But nevertheless, that too is the direction we are moving towards. And no, this is not my attitude. The report is excellent. The attitude is a typical state of a project that comes to me for consulting. Why is that? Well, firstly, when everything is going well, consultants are not called. Secondly, because, honestly, I understand that if you take my HTML and CSS code that I write and show it to someone who is really into HTML and CSS, I write such crap. Because, well, honestly, every time, without any shame, I use ChatGPT when I need to write those grids. Because it seems logical, but I mess it up. I have JavaScript that I need to remember. And now I also have to deal with CSS. So it's like bam, bam, and into production. So, when I asked about the backend, it's normal that we are forming this. And I hope, unfortunately, it's not a trend in modern front-end, but I hope it will become more of a trend. Oh my gosh, I don't want to learn something else. Do you remember how React started? It started with the concept of it's just JavaScript. We added a little sugar with JSX to make it look like HTML to you. And where have we ended up now? So that's why I'm like this. People have a normal resistance to learning new things. It's normal, and it's an important message. It's normal not to want to learn something new. It's normal. And I can repeat it a third time, maybe I'll convince myself because I don't really believe it myself. And every time I have FOMO, fear of missing out, that I miss something this, something that, something else. So, and that's why people, when I'm all advanced, actually know. I look at their project and say, well, gosh, this could be done better, that could be done better, because people most likely just didn't know, because they were too lazy to learn, because why? The previous project worked perfectly on such and such a stack. We'll just copy-paste it. So then usually this kind of conversation happens with the client. Here, words aren't even necessary. That is, the client says, make it great for me. I say 3 simple things. We throw all this out. This is the top 1 phrase you can't trust. This is just an MVP. We'll throw it out and rewrite it from scratch later. So, when they hear how much money they need to not achieve a significant business effect in the substantial perspective, they say, no way. And do you know what they get as a result? I consider myself a decent consultant because clients come back to me. Yes, it's important. This is not a sales pitch for me as a consultant. I close almost all projects from my consulting. So you need to understand that they usually end up with something like this. Why? Because businesses want to have some kind of controlled infrastructure. Well, it's like an homage, an allusion to that picture about microservices. When? Exactly. And they truly are happy. And this is the perfect compromise, because now programmers, on one hand, can continue writing somewhat messy code at a low level, and on the other hand, It all looks neat because it has some high-level structure, and we can say we have micro front-ends. Honestly, I also know that there are projects where micro front-ends are necessary and effective. I know I can even come up with domain models where they are needed and effective. But I just have never encountered such a project. All the projects where micro front-ends were used was, well, such an overkill. But it looked beautiful from an architectural point of view. And most importantly, from the perspective of job security, meaning when you need to ensure you won't be fired because no one knows how to maintain it. If you think that this is only in our front end, it's not. We probably reach this point a bit slower because if you replace front end with DevOps and this with Kubernetes, you'll get the same thing. It's an extremely complex system that is justified in a number of cases. When you need to scale, when you need to do something complex, but it's absolutely unnecessary for 90% of people, and 90% is an understatement. That's it. Actually, when I was looking for that lower meme, I was actually looking for this one, but it just fit perfectly. The client is happy. I'm happy, but honestly, from an engineering perspective, it's one of the reasons why I now want to quit consulting, because it frustrates me. Honestly, purely personally, as an engineer who enjoys writing good code, and this is my problem. I am part of the problem. That's it. Just so you understand, this is a perfect example of how I want the business to be done. After all of you posted, well, not all of you, but a certain number of people posted that it's correct to write Swan, they sent me the main slide where it was written Swan. But I needed to correct it, to fix it. Of course, I could have asked the organizers to do something they even offered, but no. Control-C, Control-V, click, click, and it's in production. A perfect illustration, once again, for the till window. And this is actually not made up. It was really placed like that on the main slide. And I don't know about you, but for me, it's that engineering mindset again. Now I'll tell you, and you won't be able to unsee it. Look at how terrible the soft sign looks in the word Lebedge and the U below. What terrible kerning. Just look at how it's stuck there. And now if you can't unsee it, congratulations, you have an engineer's brain just like me. What? Yes. Oh my. Yes, line height. How could they not adjust the line height, but it seems like it's a whole image. And so we focus on these small problems. And this is the direction where front end is heading, as I see it now. React, in the form it is developing, solves Facebook's problems in a hyper-efficient, expressive, scalable, and proven by practice way. And that's super cool. Seriously, React is awesome. It doesn't have a migration history like Vue 2 to Vue 3, precisely because Facebook has a gigantic code base on React, and they are the first to use it. But let's be honest. I don't know and can't imagine where it would be a big problem. For me, somewhere, let's say a big problem, big or small, where what Facebook offers would be a blocker. And these are the problems they solve. That is server actions. So now they have a submit form in React 19. Cool? Cool. Effective? Well, probably. Could I not live without it? Yes. Is that the definition of a blocker? No. And now, React as a platform has become bigger, more complex. And then I will again quote Dan Abramov, who, when creating Prettier, came up with an idea and called it, please don't add configuration. Well, there it's a bit resistible configuration, because when you have 10 configuration options, you have 2 to the power of 10 possibilities of how it can work. And it's very difficult. And Prettier more or less holds up, thank God. Because if you take ESLint on every other project, it is so different. ESLint has now turned into some kind of meta framework for under-programming hyperlinking. Moreover, somewhere, I was like, I hope I got rid of this busy. About 60% of the rules from my experience, and sometimes all 90, it's just because once Vasya, who created the lint config, said, I don't like it this way. I don't like it this way because you will write like this. And then, too big to fall. That is, it's already too late to change anything. And now, for example, I'm building ESLint configs from scratch. And each time, I take a step back and ask myself, if I don't enable this rule, will it really lead to an error? Or is it just the aesthete in me saying that it's rubbish? And, the aesthete usually says it's rubbish, so it needs to be enabled. But that's more for psychotherapy, not here. So, anyway. What starts with good ideas? For example, like Next, right? I don't know. I feel this way about Next with the modern map router. If you think that, once again, this is only a problem with Next. Just consider you had a React router. Well, React router is generally, from my point of view, a legend in the React world because every time they release a new major version, they say, now we definitely know how this will work. This is now the new super version. Those who have migrated between major versions of the router, I think, will understand me. But now, if you haven't heard, they came out and said, we've been building a remix over the Rector router for a long time. But now there won't be a remix. There will be Rector Router 7, which will have all the functionality of the remix, including this server-side rendering and so on. That is, you're like, do you want it or not? Do you want routing? Well, congratulations. You now carry all this complexity. And when all this complexity is right there within arm's reach, you want to use it because there it is. You've already added the library. Because tomorrow, a hypothetical junior will come to you who attended this conference. Well, today, a bit less, but from the hypothetical React Framework Day, with eyes ablaze. And we now have, basically, in React, the ability to await promises, We have a hook called use, and let's use it. You quickly add use, and it tells you, React does not yet support the ability to use promises that were created in the render function. Use either special libraries or wait. And probably the next iteration of the React compiler will address something like this. I don't know how. Although here we were also deceived. This is, also a kind of substitution of concepts that helps us perceive it a little. Why on earth is it called a React compiler? What is a compiler? A compiler translates from one programming language to another. If a compiler translates from one programming language to the same programming language, it's a transpiler. And why? Because, let's put it this way. React compiler sounds much more grandiose and much better. It's another nuance. It looks better in a promotional document. I created my own compiler, rather than I wrote a transpiler, which is ironic because the React compiler is currently implemented as a plugin for Babel, but that's a different story. All right. Let's do it this way. What problems do you currently see in modern front-end development? A lot of NPM libraries, okay? It's becoming more complex, all right? Developers don't really understand it well. Oh my, as they say, the developers are to blame, but the problem is in the front end. Forms? Forms, yes. Not enough. Of what? Not enough Vue.js. Oh my, we're working on it? Every day it seems, oh my, when was the last time you saw a new framework? That's where it gets tricky. There's more, yes. More? Complex routing, yes. Actually, says, I see that we have three. Well, everything you've mentioned can be reduced to three problems. The first problem is the great complexity of modern front-end infrastructure. Moreover, infrastructure in a very broad sense, starting from the hypothetical bundler we use to compile, right? Hypothetically from, from zero configuration, magic. And then your production build and development build work differently. And you're like, oh my God. Just so you understand, at GitLab, imagine compile a project and it works in dev, but not in production. And it only fails on the CI when the production build is compiled. Like, oh my God, what is going on? It turns out that the Vue compiler, during the build process, since people often reference, Vue files often refer to each other when they are located next to each other. It caches these files, meaning it caches the compilation result, which is normal. It caches the last 100 files. Next, how does it cache? It takes the file name, takes the compiler config, takes the file content, concatenates it into a string, and then takes the MD5 of that. 100 files. The probability of a collision, meaning that for 2 files you get the same hash, we calculated is 1.7%. Both 0.17%, sorry. And we managed this in GitLab. So when we compile, we randomly have 2 files out of those 100 in the compilation queue that have the same hash. And so, instead of 1 file, the compilation results are silently substituted with a completely different file during the build process. I won't say how many hours were spent analyzing this, but it demonstrates the complexity. The second problem is that we like to say that metrics that were previously unimportant to us are now important, such as time to first byte, time to interactive. We want the client to see everything immediately. So we need server-side rendering. We are very concerned about the bundle size. And who is asking you to load so much that your bundle is like that? Sorry, that slipped out. So, do you know who developed this code that now makes our bundle like that? So, actually, we have to implement SSR. Then we have Qwik saying, we have Resumability. In short, we generate everything on the server. And then when the user clicks a button, it only loads the part of the code needed for that button. And then it turns out that, and it's like, wow, we've solved the problem. Look at how Qwik sells it. And then it turns out that if you have a very high ping, a big delay, it's just impossible to use. If you think, oh my, these people with slow 3G, where are they? Here I am. When the power goes out, I'm sitting at the cottage, I have Starlink and speed. Actually, the latency in Starlink isn't that great. Well, physics. To the heavens and back. Then these people come and say that all this, and the third problem is that everything is new. There was a bit said about new NPM packages. That is, we have been living with HTML for 20 years. What 20? It's been around for 40 to 50 years. We developed it. Now they say, forget it. In short, we have React. React is all JS. But this JS renders into HTML, so we need to, as they say, get along. I want to ask you, who knows, right now, just honestly, that any tag, like a hypothetical input, has an attribute form in HTML, which allows you to associate it with a form, even though it won't be nested in it from an HTML perspective. Yes, okay, put them down. Now, raise your hands if you think, well, why do I need this knowledge? Exactly, you're right. But this demonstrates that we are actually, and this is my feeling about front-end in 2024, going around in circles a bit, we have taken problems that people heroically solved before, and now we are solving them again. That's normal. It's a normal research potential. Indeed, when we want a cool multi-select, we will tackle the accessibility issues that cannot be effectively solved. New browser APIs are needed for this. But that's just a tiny part of the truth. The truth is that real businesses are satisfied with the functionality that existed 20 years ago, but which we have forgotten. Right now, I'm writing a project for UNICEF, and I'm doing it on a very unusual stack. It's Hono on the server, which isn't that important. I chose it because I like JSX templates, and on the client side, I use HTMX. Who has tried HTMX? Just curious. Well, not many. I hope you will take a look. Yes, I digressed a bit, which is uncharacteristic of me, but I apologize. What is HTMX? HTMX asks, in short, what are you doing? You have a piece of HTML, and usually when you do something, you need to display or somehow change that piece of HTML. Moreover, most likely, this needs to be done based on server data. Important. Some of you might say, no, it's not always necessary to do it from the server. I remind you, 80% of my work is displaying data in one form or another that came from the server. And HTMX says, let's not invent anything and just write that. For example, when you click this button, you actually take, meaning when you click, we send a request to the server, and then the response you receive, we will display in the parent div and replace this div entirely. Entirely meaning outer HTML. You see, replacement. Why? So, is this new? Well, of course you could say that. This syntax is new. But my goodness, syntax is a minor matter. The logic of how it works is nothing new. We all know this. If all of you, I still hope, there are no people here who skipped the JavaScript stage and started directly with React. Such people already exist. So, and then it started, and then it begins. First of all, backenders, what is this? Returning HTML. I didn't go into backend to write HTML. Then, what are we going to have? How do you imagine? We will have separate endpoints that will require HTML that will return data in a specific format if I need it to look different. I'm like, well, you'll make another endpoint? But that's repetition. I say, well, no, you say you're a smart guy. You say you have a microservice architecture on the back end, so what's the problem? You'll have one service that you just render with a template at the last level, at the view, display level, and that's it. Then such a front-ender comes and says, but look, I update the table here. And then over there, I need to rewrite a piece of HTML in a completely different part of the page because it's necessary. So, what? Write small JS scripts? I say, no. HTML has the capability where you can say, take and return an element from HTML with a specific ID. If such an ID already exists on the page, it will be replaced right there. If you said so. This is called an out-of-band update. That is, you can change the content in different parts of the page with a single HTML response. And here both the backend and front-end developers are simultaneously shocked. What? The backend will know how my HTML page works, what CSS IDs are on it. I say, and 25 years ago, pages worked like that, and it was fine. And I actually recommend you, if you have the time, to try writing in HTMX. And it doesn't matter, we've already been pulled into the back end, whether we want it or not. We write in Next.js, in Nuxt, etc. We are most likely writing back-end code because back-end developers say, no, that's front-end, I don't understand it. We manage state one way or another, and whether we like it or not, there is state in HTML. There is state in HTML because, for example, we input something, we write, we create. Two-way binding in a conditional view to synchronize the state of HTML with the state of JavaScript. Then we write, my favorite test, why I loved HTML is, we need to implement drag and drop on the client side, the sortable. Do you know how I did it in HTML for UNICEF? I have. When the user, I have hidden inputs. And when you simply do drag and drop, I used a regular sortable JS. These inputs, because they are part of the HTML, get reordered. And Then when the form is submitted, they come in the order they were in the HTML. HTML becomes like the source of truth for the state. What does this mean? I am by no means saying that you should adopt this. I want you to, as I am finishing up, ask yourself 3 simple questions. Question number 1, this is the first. What complications in a certain project help me in life? Which ones and which do not? Second, for you to come to terms, I am still voting a little, but even shouting, not voting, about the fact that now we are all back-end developers, we all write back-end, although we will still be called front-end developers and considered to be just coloring, buttons. And third, that technologies, where they are heading, are being driven by slightly eccentric engineers who are interested in solving complex problems. And many things that engineers come up with are for this purpose. If you think, so you understand, and you're like, I take HTML, and then I realize that all this works only when there is a proper connection to the server. And do you know what comes to my mind? I'm like, but we have modern move. Why did I choose Hono? Because they are based on the so-called Aki Winter Siege initiative, which is when on the back end you have the same requests and responses as in a service worker, meaning a compatible web platform APIs. And this means that theoretically I can reuse the client code and server code and execute part of the server code in the service worker and then get some optimistic response earlier. Imagine that. Isn't that cool, right? Oh my, what a great engineering idea. But no, you shouldn't do that. It's, you know, like monks have asceticism. It's the same here. We all need to learn to sometimes say impossible, because then all this gets complicated. Resumability, as Qwik mentioned. In fact, all modern front-end frameworks, I perceive them somewhat like this. Well, I mean, I really see that these are all different colors of the same direction, even HTMX, which I mentioned a bit. It's the same about having a client, a server, and so on. This is a photo where we were checked into a hotel yesterday, and it's perfect. Why is it perfect? Because I really like the name IQ Hotel, which resonates well with the theme I emphasized in the presentation, that people with high IQs love solving complex problems. And if you learn to solve business problems in simple ways, even if it's a bit like those poop emojis, everyone will be happy, both you and your business. That's all.